Welcome to the Dice Tower, a series of video reviews about board and card games. Here are your hosts.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vassell.
And I'm Stephen Buonocore.
I'm Mike DeLisio.
And I'm Roy Kennedy.
All right, folks. Well, today we're talking about the expansion, the new expansion for Twilight Imperium 4th Edition, the expansion Prophecy of Kings. Now, this is a gigantic expansion adding a ton of stuff to the base game. So Roy's a big fan of Twilight Imperium. Mr. Buonocore is a big fan of it. I like playing it. Mike, we brought him on because we needed a fourth player.
I conned Mike into it. It was great.
Special.
Mike, that was a great endorsement of your ability to play.
I felt pretty good about it, yeah.
Well, actually, in seriousness, Mike has not played before. So before we jump into this expansion, wanted to talk about where we all were at with Twilight Imperium. So hopefully, folks, I think we have four very different perspectives. So, Roy, you've played Twilight Imperium 4 the most of all.
Yeah, I've played Twilight Imperium 4 several times with lots of different groups. I played at conventions. I played in game stores. I played it at my house with friends. So I've played it in a lot of different situations. So definitely enjoy the 4X genre.
And I played Twilight Imperium 4th, but I played Twilight Imperium 3 way more. So my experience was less than Roy's. And then, Mr. Buonocore, I think you hadn't played 4. You've only played 3 up to this point, right?
I had never played 4th edition, but I had played 3rd edition with all of its expansions extensively. I'd say at least a dozen times, including it like in competition, World Board Gaming Championship competition. So I was very experienced with 3rd edition. Wow, I played in a tournament. That just, you know what that means? You committed like 2 days to playing the game.
And Mike, what about you?
Yeah, I had not played any iteration of Twilight Imperium. I was obviously aware of it, but I'd kind of resigned myself to the fact that I might never play it. So I was actually very excited to get a chance to try this.
Alrighty, so folks, if you're watching this, I'm going to assume you already know how to play Twilight Imperium to some degree. I'm going to go over what's in this expansion, a very base overview because it would take forever to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Then we'll come back and give you our opinions.
All right, let's take a look here. First of all, we have a lore compendium, and this just talks about all the new different races. It's not necessary to the game at all. The expansion rules, so again, more lore. Then it tells you all the different components, setup. Then this is it. This is the rules. There's really just 2 pages of new rules. I mean, there's some game board setup and things, a new map appendix, and more maps, and that's it. Now, I mean, it does let you play if you want to play with 8 players, huge setups with hyperlinks. Now, hyperlinks is probably the first thing we want to talk about because this matters for an odd number of players. Now, Roy tells me that people have been doing this online for a long time, but this game comes with these hyperlink tiles, and you can put them here, and what that essentially does is it makes it so that there's not a big empty space between players. So you can see here, if you play with 5 players, these hyperlinks, which you just shoot from one tile to the other, are between these 2 players, so it's as if they're neighbors, which is a pretty interesting idea. So if you have an odd number of players, this expansion pretty much solves that problem. Speaking of more players, it adds 2 more colors. We got pink and orange, both colors I like a lot. It also includes a bunch of new models here for mechs for the different colors. However, the colors are a little odd. For example, here's the yellow with the mechs in. Can you spot the mech? The yellow doesn't match the original ones. I don't find this to be that big of a deal. I mean, it's yellow and yellow. We found some of the colors didn't match. Happily, the orange and the pink ones match perfectly. So let's take a look at the new races here. Now realize it's impossible for us to go over these in detail. I'll tell you why. Because not only do they have a special ability, but each player now has, each of the different factions has a mech. Everyone's mech is going to be different. Each person has their own flagship that's different. There's leaders, which we'll talk about in a second, which are different. There's your own racial technology. So just this is not the only thing to look at with a faction any longer. However, it's pretty much all we're going to look at here. So we have the Titans of Ul, which sounds cool. And here when they explain, they have these sleeper tokens that they'll be able to put on things, and they're going to be able to replace those tokens with PDS to awaken them. And of course, there's more to it than that. these guys, who also are metal, I mean, if these guys fight these guys, or if one falls in love with another, what, do they have a metal cube as a baby? Anyway, when these guys are in combat, these are very, very much straight up in the other person's face. When they win a combat, they get to put a command token in their reinforcements pool and take command tokens from them, and you can use the abilities of your opponent's commander, which is one of the leaders here. So that's interesting. During setup, you don't get the alliance, so you can't make alliances with other players. These guys, I love their ability, but realize it's very aggro. Capture your opponent's non-structure units that are destroyed. So if you destroy stuff, you capture them, and when you produce them, you can basically build that unit for free by turning it in. I think that's fantastic. That's really cool. And you can also, discard those upgrade technologies. This is maybe my favorite ability, but realize when you play this, it forces you to attack people. People are going to realize you're going to do that. Here, the Nebula don't affect your ship's unit with the Imperium. When someone activates the system, these guys are kind of, they let you move ships through them. They're like the opposite. These are a very peaceful race. The Nomad, you get 2 extra Nomad faction agents. So you have 3 agents. These are leaders that you'll have. And during the agenda phase, after an outcome you voted for or predicted is resolved, you get a trade good. These are my favorite thematically. I love the fact that there's like a conjoined race or 2 races. The cats were warriors, and these little monkey creatures who are, just really smart and are working together. I do like reading the lore of these stories. And these distant suns, you get to draw an extra card when you explore a planet. We'll talk about that with mechs. And these guys are all about mechs. Your mechs roll an extra die with their flagship and such. And then the Argent, who are birds. They always vote first, but they get an extra vote for each player in the game, which of course is a little weird because it makes them more powerful with more players in the game. And also they go with anti-fighter barrage. Like I said, none of these abilities sounds like super amazing, but again, when you combine it with the flagship and everything else, there's a lot going on. There's also a lot new planets and things, especially planets for the new races that are in the game. And there's a couple interesting things that are included with this, which here we got this one, which is by itself. It's out by itself. This is Kraos. Oh, that's right. One more faction. I didn't forget about these guys, the Ghosts of Kraos. And basically, they're warp gates, and they also get to jump. They jump through the wormholes. And so this kind of starts out from everybody else. They has their own Delta wormhole, and they'll be able to move through wormholes, which is good because there's also Malice in the game. You can see Malice here has Alpha, Beta, and Gamma wormholes, although it only starts with Gamma, and when you land on it, you'll turn it into this. Malice is one of what is called legendary planets. There's several legendary planets in the game, and in fact, one of the legendary planets is hidden. Legendary planets, when you get them, you will, in Hope's End, which is my favorite planet in all of Twilight Imperium, when you get them, you'll get the legendary card that comes with these. So they have their own regular planet card, but they also have a legendary one. So for example, Hope's End, which comes with the Imperial Arms Vault here, says you can exhaust this card at the end of your turn to put a mech from your reinforcements on any planet you control or draw an action card. So this card, every turn, I get a free mech. And this one here, every turn I get 2 fighters. And this one here, every turn I get 2 trade goods. And this one here, every turn I get 2 infantry. Legendary planets are great, but realize you'll be fighting over. A new mechanism is added in a game called Exploration. When you first take control of a planet that has one of these matching symbols, and so there's different matching symbols here for the 3 different types here. You can see red, green, and blue, where you have cultural, industrial, and hazardous. And so let's say I take control of this planet, I get to draw the top card of this deck and do whatever it says. So here it says I can place an infantry from my reinforcements on this planet. On this one here, I would attach it to the planet. Its resource value goes up by 1, and its influence value goes up by 2. On the green one here, I gain a commodity, or I can spend a trade good or commodity to draw an action card. And they're all kind of like that. They have things, the green ones are trade, but many of them also have fragments. So here I can purge 3 of my fragments to gain a relic. So if you get 3 fragments of the same type, you get to draw a relic card. And these relic cards are kind of powerful cards that you use at the start of your agenda phase. You can purge this card and exhaust all your plants to gain any tech. When you research a tech, you can exhaust, ignore a prerequisite, Purge this card, take 3 action cards of your choice from the discard pile. And so there's all different kinds of these, but you need 3 of the same type. There's also another deck of exploration cards, and these are when there's a new technology in the game that allows you to basically, when you go to a space on the board that's blank, that there's nothing in it, you can draw one of these. And these have, like here, this one is one of the hidden planets. There's a Mirage planet token that shows up. This is one of the legendary planets. So you might find a planet in this spot. Or here, you just draw another secret objective. Or here, draw 2 action cards. You never know sure what you might find, but you also might find these unknown relics, which count as a relic of any of the 3 types. And remember, relics of different types can be traded from players to players too. So if I'm trying to collect all the green ones, if I have 2 of them, I might try to get a 3rd one from you. There's a new board, so players have their original board. There's a new board here, and one of the things you'll put on your board is your mech. Now, I've already talked a little bit about mechs. Players are going to have mechs. They're ground units that can be played. But each player's mech's going to be different depending on your race. So almost all the mechs, their cost is 2, and they need a 6 or higher in combat. But they all have a special ability, and again, this special ability is completely different based on the mech. So here, for example, your infantry and player are not affected by your fragile faction ability, which is what the Jolnar have, and most mechs can sustain damage here. So after you take control of a planet, you may spend a trade good to put a mech on that planet. Or other players' ground forces cannot use sustained damage. This one has sustained damage, planetary shield, and production of 2. This one, after you use your stall tactics faction ability, you can place a mech on a planet you control. Now, again, a lot of these may not make sense, but you need to know everything about the different factions. But each faction has their own mech. There's one for every faction. So that's one of the things that's on this board. But you also have these 3 spots here for your hero, commander, and agent. So you're going to place them in these spots, and you can see there's a 1, 2, and 3, so you know which one goes where. And there's going to be different ones for all the factions, including the factions in the base game. So your agent is the only one that really starts in play. So for example, here for the birds, when anyone produces ground force in a system, you can exhaust this card, and that player may place those units on any planets they control in the system and adjacent systems. So most of the agents that you have, the single ones, allow you to do stuff with other players. Not always, but for example, these guys here, after a player moves ships into a system that doesn't contain any planets, you can exhaust this card. That player gets a command token. Your agents can often help other people out. Your commander and your hero start locked. They don't even come into play until you unlock them, and each one's different. So this one, to unlock, you need to have 6 units that have anti-fighter barrage, space cannon, or bombardment on the game board. This one, you need to have 3 scored objectives. Once you unlock them, you'll flip them over, and they'll do various things. So this commander, for example, it says when one of your units makes a roll for a unit ability, you can choose one of those units to roll an extra die. Here you can move any number of your ships from any system to any number of other systems that contain one of your command tokens and no other player ships, then purge it. Many times the commanders, the ones that are level 3, are one-time uses. Like, for example, this one here, gain a relic and get the secondary ability of up to 2 ready or unchosen strategy cards during this action. Spend command tokens from your reinforcement set of your strategy pool. That's all fantastic, but then it's gone. And again, this one has 3 scored objectives. They're going to be different, the different things that you need to do them, although most of the commanders, I think, have 3 scored objectives. But again, they're like a one-time use. And I'm not going to go over all of them, but again, this further differentiates your faction from everyone else. And even one of the factions has multiple agents. They fixed the number 4 and number 2 strategy cards. Number 4, I think it's just wording. Number 2, it's about the planets that you can ready any 2 planets. Here you can only ready them in the same system. I found these to be really minor, but I guess if you play Twilight Imperium a lot, this matters more. There are 8 new technologies for each of the races. None of them are like bombastically big. You'll notice, in fact, 4 of them don't even need prerequisites. The dark energy one lets you explore the empty systems like I was mentioning earlier. When you activate a system, you can explore a planet in that system that contains 1 or more of your units. So this lets you explore other planets in the same area. You can produce a ship in a system that contains 1 of your space docks as a free action. So this is like just more, well, makes you spend a little bit longer going through all the different technologies that you want to build. And that's pretty much it, other than more stuff. More objectives, more laws, more action cards, just more stuff to throw in. As far as I can tell, I haven't yet finished putting everything in one box, but I'm pretty sure you'll be able to fit everything in the base game box. And that's what's in this one. Let's get back to the guys.
All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is something that me and Roy have been discussing for a while, and I want to get everyone's opinions on this. There's a lot of stuff in here. We're going to go over the different pieces of this as time in a bit, like all the different things. But the one thing about this that I'm going to say negative about is this is one giant expansion that you have to take everything or nothing.
Yes.
In the past, Twilight Imperium, the 3rd edition, had multiple modules. So, like, let's say, for example, the leader cards. And you just said, well, I'd like to use those. Well, you have to use those if you're going to use the new factions. You have to use the mechs. You have to throw all of this in or none of it. There's no in between. And I found that to be actually, that's my, by the way, I'm not saying I dislike the expansion or anything, but that's my biggest negative is the fact that you got to use it all or none of it.
Is there a specific reason? I mean, I know it doesn't indicate in the rules that you can pull pieces out, but I'm trying to remember the linkages. Is there no way to take out a piece?
So many of the factions are intertwined with that stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
And also there's the new action cards, the new law cards. Reference them. I'm pretty sure many of the new factions would be underpowered if you don't include that stuff in.
Sure.
And
yes.
Some of the planets, there's so much crossover that you couldn't just pull one thing out, I don't think.
I concur that not being able to pick and choose is a drawback to the new system versus the 3rd edition system where you could just say, I want this, but not this, and this.
Well, I don't have any perspective that you have as far as like the context, but I do think it's interesting that you're talking about a game that is a extremely lengthy game. I mean, that's something I knew going in. And is it really a big difference? I mean, what I guess we'll get to, and what I'm curious when you bring this up, Tom, is what parts of the expansion would you have left out? What parts do you feel like are the best of this expansion that you would keep in and play every time, and which ones would you not? Because I just don't have that frame of reference. This first time I played it, we played with everything, right? So it's not like I would play just the. Yeah, I definitely went in the deep end. So I'll be curious to hear what you all have to say about maybe what parts you would keep in. I don't know if you want to talk about that now, Roy, but what were your thoughts on it?
I think it's very interesting overall, like the whole aspect of not having modules anymore. 3, they basically did away with modules in total in 4. There is one way to play Twilight Imperium 4. If somebody says they're playing Twilight Imperium 4, they're playing a game a specific way. And the expansion's the same way. It just adds everything in together. Back in the day when everybody was playing 3, you'd say, oh, I play 3. Well, I play with leaders, and I play with distant suns, and I play with these artifacts, and everybody played the game slightly different, and you can kind of tailor the game to whether you want to have a more grandiose, epic, long experience, or whether you want to have like a streamlined, like simplified game that might go a little bit quicker. In 4, there is one way to play 4. You play with everything or you don't play with any of it at all. So you don't really have that modularity of being like, oh, well, this time we won't play leaders because that might be too much for the new player at the table. If you want to play with the new factions, you're playing with leaders. Oh, we're not going to play with the exploration because I feel like it might add a little bit of time flipping over stuff. No, you have to add it in because this race does better with that sort of stuff, so you have to play with it, which I don't think is a bad thing if you're going in for it all in. I think that's cool, but you have to realize that is a big difference in between 3 and 4.
Sure.
Now, in the overview, folks, I mentioned I didn't know if it would all fit in a box. It does, but oh my goodness, it's barely. Nothing else will fit into this box. And so when we put it into the Dice Tower library, I'm of the opinion if you're playing TI4, you want all this expansion stuff in it anyway. So let's talk about it. I'm going to pick a few things from the expansion. The one thing I really liked personally was exploration. Now, exploration has been in Twilight Imperium in the past in the form of distant suns. I've never been a fan of distant suns because there was some very negative things that could happen in it. And I thought that was too random where if I land on a planet and I get some, I found some shock troopers and Mr. Buonocore landed on a planet and all his guys were wiped out. That's a big swing. That's just straight up random. But this one, with the exception of one card, every card is fairly positive, and it also just makes it fun to explore planets, I found. What did you think, Steve?
Absolutely. That is one of the best individual small parts of the entire expansion system. And you want that in there because you want players to be moving out. And even though you can't turtle in Twilight Imperium, it's just not going to work. You want people going and expanding and constantly going. So like I ran over to the wormhole because there was something over there. And of course I was going to kind of control that wormhole. But really loved, and every time you got to someplace, boom, there's something really cool that you're going to get from it. So loved it.
Yeah, it's hard for me to even picture the game without that. That seems like it's something that's almost so intuitive. You go to a planet, you discover something. And at first because they have these shards, right? You have the different colored shards that you can find. And at first I thought, well, those aren't really as exciting. It's like, oh, you're getting something. Oh, I'm getting a shard. But as I realized that they were tied to some of the point gaining,
the artifacts.
The artifact, yes. I was like, oh, now maybe this isn't an issue. And it also gave me something that could be used in negotiation, which is a huge part of this game. And so I was like, oh, so this is cool. Maybe it didn't seem that powerful at first, but I could tell you, Roy and I negotiated, and that directly led to a point for me by doing that. But I was able to do it in such a way it didn't seem so powerful. It's like, well, I'll get my second one, but I had a card that allowed me to get a point for having 2 rather than 3. So I really liked that.
I think this is interesting because Twilight Imperium is a 4X game that was missing the first X before. There was no real exploration in the game, and this added that exploration back into Twilight Imperium 4. So you're being able to explore planets as you're going around, finding new interesting things. I do like that most of it's all positive. Of course, some players could get better things than other players, but like you said, I think the interesting part is that shards, the fact that it gives you one more thing to trade and trying to negotiate around, and maybe like you can use those shards to sweeten a deal so somebody can complete a set, because you're only going to be exploring so many planets during the game, so it might be hard to get a full set of those by yourself. But when you add in the fact that you can wheel and deal with them, I mean, it makes it very interesting. It's also wildly different what you're going to get off of the artifacts that you get after you do the shards or whatever. So it can be more interesting powers just all across the board. That's what this whole expansion is, just more powers, more everything, right?
And I also thought it was really neat that once you got that one technology, you could explore the open space, which hitherto had been the most boring of spaces on the board. And now you might find something and even find a hidden planet.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So one thing this game did was bring in those legendary planets, including my favorite, Hope's End. And that makes it so that instead of Mechatol Rex being the only planet that is really contested, right? Most planets you fight over a little bit because they're basically different numbers and maybe some tech bonuses. But those legendary planets, you want those if you can get them because they're that powerful. And I liked those additions to the games. And I also just liked having the more stuff. The Wormhole Nexus, that was from an expansion in Twilight Imperium 3 also. I've always thought that was a fun thing. And the hyperlanes is a neat idea. So what'd you all think of the extra space stuff they added like that? Steve?
You have to remind me, hyperlanes? I don't even remember what that part was.
The hyperlanes, we might have showed that to you. That's where if you're playing with 5 or 7 players, they connect 2 of the players who are farther away from each other so that it feels like the board is evenly spaced out.
Right.
Yeah, there was always like fan-made modules that did the same thing. They've kind of brought this into the actual game, so it makes it really cool.
Yeah, but as far as like, I mean, the connections between the different areas were huge. And you had to it makes it a little difficult because you have to really watch who's adjacent to you. Because like everybody's adjacent to each other like the entire game almost. And maybe not one space away, but it was quite easy for me to jump on a wormhole and jump to another side and then go attack somebody on the other side. I like that. I think those kind of things make it more fair and more balanced. It's just difficult, of course, to keep your eye on every space on the board is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and again, I don't have the frame of reference. I can't say what it was like before, but I will say the one thing I was surprised by was the fact that there is a lot of stuff and there's a lot of things to keep track of and administer, but I never felt overwhelmed by it, and that really kind of surprised me. So I almost wonder what it was like playing just the base game, because we had everything in there, right? We had, and so my first time playing was with all of this stuff. And the one thing that I did want to make sure I was doing was, okay, make sure that you're keeping track of what the different powers are, the different things you can do. But other than that, it didn't feel too much. So I guess what I'm saying is it didn't feel bloated at all. Even for such a big, epic game, it didn't feel bloated to me. It felt like everything there had a purpose.
Yeah, I think those legendary planets are extremely interesting because now you have planets that have those special abilities. And as far as like planets and different space tiles and things like that, more is always better, especially if you're talking about an epic experience game, and having more varieties of map setups and all that stuff is just more replayability, which of course these games take forever. So how much replayability do you really need? But it is cool to have all of those different things. And a lot of those legendary planets have some of the different objectives tied to them. Like I know Mike had one where he had to control a legendary planet. That's another way to gain points during the game and things like that. And it's cool because you can exhaust some to get trips or ships on the board, you exhaust some to get extra like mechanized units, or exhaust some to put some guys down. There's all sorts of different planets that you can have, and it makes you feel special. It's like, oh, I'm really gunning for that planet because it's going to give me that special ability as well. So yeah, I really enjoy all of that stuff.
Well, speaking of keeping track of things, the biggest amount of new stuff in a sense was there's 3 leaders for every faction. Well, one faction has more than that, but most factions
4
have
leaders
3
for my
leaders.
faction.
And a mech. And each mech is different, and the leaders are different. And so that gives you essentially 4 new things. You add in your flagship and your special ability and anything else going on. There's a lot of stuff that's being thrown together here. So on one hand, I'm a huge fan of this because it makes the different species so asymmetrical. They're so different at this point in time. The disadvantage of that being I can't keep track of everything on the table.
You just can't.
I can't remember what your mech is going to do. I don't know what your grand glorious leader is going to do at any given point. And I think it might I should say I think it might. It's definitely going to slow the game down more because there's no way I'll have all that stuff memorized. But I'm willing to give that up, I think, for all that just I'm so unique. My species is so unique and different than everybody else's. What did you think about the leaders and mechs, Buonocore?
Yeah, very, very interesting concept. The mechs were just great. I just loved being able to throw some mechs on a planet because they were going to be just impenetrable, unless you brought down a lot of guys and bombarded them and things like that. Just what you said, that you're giving each species like this amazing differentiation, and it just makes it so interesting. And yes, no way am I going to be able to memorize what everybody's stuff is. The only way to do that would be to everyone knows what they're going to be playing, and then you can do a review offline before you get there and then start playing with each one of those races. Maybe then it would work. But if you're a big fan of this game, you're going to learn these kind of things, and it's, and over time you're going to get it.
Yeah, I guess for me, not only am I not going to be able to keep track of what you're doing, Tom, and what you're doing, Roy, and what you're doing, Stephen, I can't keep track of everything I have. And I'm not, it's just the truth. It's the truth.
Yep.
What I tried to do was focus on the things that I knew were going to lead to the points through the objectives. And what do I have in front of me that's going to help me on that objective? And that made it much more manageable to me. Also, it would bother me a lot more, as odd as this might sound, it would bother me more to not know what everybody was able to do in a 2-hour game. This is a game where when you go into it, at least I went into it knowing this is a whole day affair, right? This is going to take a significant amount of time. It's an event. It's not just a game. This is an event. And so I wasn't getting as stressed out about the idea of, oh, it's going to take me a few minutes to do this. And I get, maybe that helps with a group, right? There might be a group dynamic that's part of that. But in this group, I can say I never felt like anything was too much. I guess I felt like, yeah, there's a lot, and I'm not going to even try to know everything that Steven does. I'm going to try to focus on our interaction points and what do I have now that ties in with that. So again, I'm coming at this completely new. Roy, you've been doing this a long time. How did you feel about it?
I think the leaders are actually pretty cool, and they add so many special abilities to the game. The races were all very asymmetrical as it was, but now you have all of these leaders that are asymmetrical as well. And all those leaders are very much engineered to be able to exhaust them and use them to kind of like use them in negotiation situations. Like, oh, I can exhaust this and help you move a guy from here to there, or I can exhaust this and help this work here. Like almost all this expansion has basically made Twilight Imperium do more of what it did already. Be extremely like negotiation and asymmetrical and crazy like expanding space, but also do what Twilight Imperium did already as well. None of it is made to make this game any shorter. Like they didn't say, we're going to make things to make this game short in this way or short in that way. No. It's like, let's make it epic. Let's make it bigger. Let's make it take longer. So I really enjoy all this stuff. I really enjoy how all that stuff works. But like when you're doing all these negotiation facts with like leaders, like I can exhaust this leader and then we can re-roll this combat so that you're in. So that way you don't have to do that. It's like, rerolling a whole combat, that took us like 5 minutes with how many ships that were in there. Let's redo it again, I guess, you know. And there's a lot of things that are just going to start things over and change things and have more points of negotiation that are going to make the game even longer. But it does make the game more epic because you're going to remember those moments.
Let me ask, if you don't mind, Roy, since you have the most experience with TI4, this added a significant amount of time, wouldn't you say, to the game?
I think if you're playing with all this stuff and you're taking the time to negotiate out the way things should actually be negotiated with like figuring out which leader is this and that, there could be a decent amount of time added to this. Because normally when I play Twilight Imperium, I'm always trying to figure out how to min-max things to make the game as fast as possible. The hardest part for me to get this to the table is by trying to like talk people into like, we can do this fast, I can do all this stuff. When we played with all this stuff, I felt like we were going the other direction. Like, oh man, this is going to make things take longer instead of shorter. Holy smokes. Yeah. I mean, it was fun stuff. I really enjoyed a lot of the stuff. I enjoyed the exploration. I enjoyed the leaders, but none of it was going to make it go any faster. It's actually going to make it go longer.
Alrighty, so let's talk final thoughts here and see where we are. And you can mention, you know, kind of where you are at with TI4 at this point in time. So I think we'll start with Mike here, since you're new to this. What'd you think of everything?
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I do think that it helped that I had a group of experienced players that I was playing with for the first time. That really, for me, I think it took some of the cognitive load off because I wasn't having to worry about anything other than what I was doing. And so I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed the experience. And Steven and I were talking a little bit at the end of the game because I don't have a lot of experience in long, epic games like this. I just don't. I oftentimes actively avoid them. But something that Steven said really resonated with me, which was that this is a game that you're going to remember for years to come just because it tells a story. And I know that that's a little bit of a cliche. It's not a storytelling game, but there are very definite parts of this game that I know I'm going to remember. I'm going to remember that Tom was somehow able to get all three of us to give him a point to not come. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
You know what I mean? All of these things are things that don't typically happen in games. Now, you know, Euro games can have these great mechanics and you could really enjoy that experience, but it's probably not something you're going to remember a year down the line. So I do get it now. I get why these games are so popular. It's still not something I feel like I can probably play very often, but I'm really glad I had a chance to play it this time.
All right. What about you, Buonocore?
Yeah, and I will, you know, and that great point about the epicness of the game and the fact that you create these amazing memories, especially ones like Tom Vassell may be the worst player of this game of all time, as I set him up.
I'm not working for you.
No. But you would have
potentially your opinion.
Potentially would have won the game. I took out Roy.
That's just because you're a poor player.
Took out Roy on Mechatol Rex. Didn't take him out, but softened him.
I think you crashed against a wall on Mechatol Rex is how that worked.
Yeah, I softened you up significantly. Tom could have easily walked in there. He didn't.
No, not easily. I know math.
Worst move of all time in Twilight Imperium. That's all I'm going to say. Worst move of all time in Twilight Imperium. Anyway, overall thoughts on this is that, I mean, it's just pretty simple. If you're a fan of this game, right, if you're a fan of Twilight Imperium 4th Edition, and you're going to see yourself playing it, pick a number. Once a year, even?
Sure.
I think it's like must have expansion, because you just want it, because then you can add this to it usually when you play the game, or at least have that option to add to it. If you're you don't own Twilight Imperium already, this is definitely not something that, now that they did this, I have to buy the whole thing. No, it doesn't make sense. If you're a fan, if you're going to play this on any regularity, buy it. Otherwise, if you just have it on your shelf and you're like, I might pull this out in 3 years, you don't need it. It doesn't add something to the game that a great experience with the base game wouldn't sort of already give you.
And what about you, Roy?
I think if you already know whether or not you're going to be getting this expansion probably before you even watch this video. I mean, this is a expensive, grandiose game, and this expansion is expensive and grandiose as well. It adds lots of new factions. Like, everybody who's like a super fan of Twilight Imperium loves the factions. This gives you even more factions to explore. It gives you leaders to explore. It gives you all that stuff to explore. I try to play Twilight Imperium once a year, and I was glad that I got to play it this year because I normally play around my birthday time, and it got skipped because of all the stuff going on. I did get a chance to play, but the thing is this game isn't going to be making your games any shorter at all. If you're there for the negotiation, if you're there for like long, crazy battles with all sorts of like building up and clashing against each other, if that's what you're in there for, get this expansion. You're really going to enjoy it. If you're looking for something to make the game quicker or easier to get to the table, that is not this at all. So it's not going to make it easier to get to the table, but it's going to make those epic experiences that you're never going to forget when you play the game. I love the 4X genre, and this has tons of 4X negotiation with agendas and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. I really enjoyed it, but also I don't know when or if ever I will be able to play it again.
Yeah, I've also cooled on the whole game as a whole, but it's not because it's a bad game. It's just because it's extremely long. But if I play, the next time I play TI4, it's going to be with this expansion. I often complain that expansions add too much stuff, but this adds stuff I like. I like exploration. I like the fact that the species are so divergent at this point in time. I thought the leaders were introduced in a much more easy way to get in the game. It just adds more of everything. There's just more stuff everywhere. No game will ever be alike. And so, to that end, again, if you own TI4, you've already ordered it. I'm sure of it. If you're wavering, so it's good. Again, my argument would be, I wish it was modular, because I might say, hey, I don't feel like playing with leaders today, but I can see why it's not. I don't know that it needs anything else ever. I feel like maybe it's topped off now with stuff. Oh, and quick shout out to the new species. It's cool to have that much more, again, stuff to pick out.
Yeah,
sure.
Whew. Well, that's it, folks. We actually, next week, we'll be posting a shortened playthrough that we did of this, where you will once again hear Mr. Buonocore spout off his slurs. But look for that. So thank you. Until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Stephen Buonocore.
I'm Mike Delisio.
And I'm Roy Cannaday.
Have fun conquering the galaxy.
Woohoo!